All right.
All right, so welcome to our presentation on taking care of stress. So my name is Arianne, and I am the early childhood mental health specialist for our North County locations. Essentially what that means is that my role is to help with the social and emotional development of the children that we serve. And sometimes this also means working with the family on social and emotional concerns, and particularly working through stress. So with me is Emily, and she serves the same function, but for our South County sites. And this is part of the Johnson & Johnson Healthcare Institute. So this is focusing on community health. And the topic that we've chosen to work on for mental health is stress, which has been particularly relevant for this year. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Oops, sorry guys. And to just go over a little bit of the learning objectives of things that we hope that you gain from this training is just kind of understanding what stress is, the definition of it, recognizing the link that we have between our thoughts and our stress, and oftentimes our behaviors, and identifying and practicing strategies that we can use to help deal with our stress during the moments that we are really overwhelmed, or kind of creating this I guess like mental health diet, right? Where we're consistently absorbing the things that are good for us to try to keep us more even keeled. And then also understanding how stress impacts you and your child, because so much of that is connected to us and how we're dealing with our emotions and the way that children feel.
So to get us started, we're want to talk about the origins of stress, to really understand the skills and techniques that we'll dive into later. We first have to understand stress within the context of where it's coming from, what it's signaling to us. So every day, our body and our brain send us messages to signal a deficit or a need. So think of hunger, frustration, sleepiness. I'm sure we've all experienced being extremely hungry to where you're angry, hangry. So stress is one of the ways that our bodies and our brains communicates with us. That's simply all it is. Stress originates from a feeling of incompetence or an inability to meet one or more of our needs. So you'll see that we have this pyramid on this slide, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if you've taken a basic psychology course, you're probably very familiar with this. So at the bottom are like our physical needs, our safety needs. Those are our basic needs that must be met before any other need on the pyramid can be satisfied. Moving on from that are the psychological needs. So connectedness, belonging, self-esteem needs. And then finally, once we have all of those met, we can work on self-fulfillment. So what stress indicates is that there's been like some sort of perceived threat or deficiency to the integrity of one or more of these needs. So if I'm struggling to make rent one month and I'm not sure that I'm going to have my basic need of housing met, there's no way I can focus on anything above that need on the pyramid. So certain examples might look like a job in which an employee is unable to keep up with the demand of their work due to a lack of support or maybe training. That would fall under an esteem need on this pyramid. Perhaps a student who is persistently bullied or rejected by their peers at school, they may decide to frequently skip class. And so that would indicate a deficiency in their connectedness needs, which is the middle of that pyramid. So in order to meet our higher level needs, such as connectedness, feelings of achievement, reaching our potential, we have to have secured our basic needs of food, water, warmth, rest, safety. So it's really important when we're identifying the source of our stress to understand where it's truly coming from. What is the core need that is signaling this stress response? And so this pyramid might be a helpful way for you to identify the source of stress that you're experiencing.
And then also just kind of going over the types of stress, because I think oftentimes we don't realize there's different forms of stress and those different forms impact us in different ways. So stress can actually be positive or it can be negative. And So when you have that good stress, it's typically kind of in response to a positive change or a big change, an exciting challenge, maybe it's a new job or moving to a new place, right? They're short term and they're good, but when you're starting a new job, there's all of these new demands on you. And so there is an increase in stress that is to be expected. However, that generally kind of smooths out as you get more accustomed and more confident in your job. Um, there's tolerable stress, so kind of that brief period where it's this kind of intense stress response that you'll see for a shorter period of time. And then there's the toxic stress. So that's a prolonged, intensive period of stress. And it really activates your stress response system. And one of the things that really creates that toxic stress is not having protective relationships. So, a big part of stress and dealing with stress are the relationships and social supports that you have. Sorry for my stuttering, it's been a long day. um, so, stress is really kind of classified by how long and how intense your stress experience is. So, kind of like going into that tolerable or acute stress, it's more of a short term and often can be recovered really rapidly or easily. And so, I really like to think of um, if you're in a car, right, and you almost run into the person behind you, you notice that increase in your heart rate, you're probably breathing a little shallow, and you're like, holy crap, I almost got in an accident. Like, oof. But then you tend to calm back down once you're going and you're not in that stressful place, and you're okay. There's also that episodic stress. So that's similar to acute stress, but it happens more frequently. So you're experiencing that more often. And then there's the chronic stress, which turns into that toxic stress, oftentimes, if there are not protective relationships. And that is really that prolonged, intense stress that we experience that is very impactful for us, not only mentally, but also physically.
So this is a really great graphic of the brain to help us further understand where stress originates from and how it actually impacts and changes our ability to think, plan, and act. So since stress is a cue from our body that we're experiencing a demand placed upon us, our brain signals our body to respond in a way to cope with this demand. So this can take several forms. This response that we do enact when we are experiencing stress is often based on our previous experiences with similar stressors. However, in a case where we have no previous experiences, so think of this pandemic, our brain may automatically revert to survival mode. So that's that fight, flight, or freeze phrase that you've probably heard before. So the survival state may look like physical aggression, whereas the emotional state may look like verbal aggression. We cannot access our problem-solving skills if we are stuck in either the lower or the midbrain, so that red or blue part on the graphic. So we're going to dive a little deeper into what is going on in each of these segments of the brain. So this is adapted from conscious discipline, which if you've never looked into conscious discipline for your child, your relationship with your child, I highly recommend it. It's a great program that helps us learn more about ourselves and then how to carry that over into our interactions with our children. So this brain state model is actually the basis of a lot of conscious discipline. So in that survival state, that red part on the graphic, the only way to soothe the survival state, so if you recognize that you are in your survival state, or perhaps your child's in their survival state, is through the creation of safety. So in a survival state, we feel triggered by a threat. Our only skills accessible to us are fight, flight, freeze, surrender. Those are common phrases. So we can't think clearly, for example, when a tiger or a bear is chasing us. And in the modern world, that tiger or that bear may be, the stressful job or the bills that are piling up. But our brain's evolutionary skill set, regardless of what that bear is, are going to be the same. It's going to be that fight, flight, freeze. So the only way to get out of that survival state is the creation of safety. So if we're in that mid part of the brain, the blue part, that's the emotional state. So the only way to soothe an upset emotional state is through the creation of connection. So the emotional state is our response to upset when we're upset. And this can only, again, be soothed through the connection of others. An upset emotional state is triggered by the world not going our way. So something is not working our way. It's not meeting our expectations or what we had planned or hoped for. It limits our ability to see from another's point of view. So we're not easily able to take perspective or see differing points of view. Our empathy is probably diminished in this state. In this upset, unconscious state, it keeps us on autopilot. So our tones and our words are often going to match those of key authority figures from our childhood. So I don't know if anyone's ever had the experience where maybe you're really upset, and then when you're reflecting later, you're like, oh my God, I sounded exactly like my mother. And I always said I was never going to sound like my mother. So we revert to
Always.
we revert to in this case, we're talking about like disciplining children in this example. We often revert to disciplining the same way that we were disciplined because that's how we've been programmed. And when we're in this midbrain state, we can't think about what we would ideally do because we're so flooded. So we revert back to those sounding like our mom. Even if we know these behaviors are ineffective or hurtful, it's just human nature. This is what we do in our midbrain. And so to get past that, we create connection. And later on in the presentation, we will explore ways to do this. So then that final state, the green part of our brain, that's really where we like to be. It feels good to be in the executive state. This is our optimal state for problem solving and learning. So as we learn to regulate and integrate our internal state to be one of relaxed alertness, so that's low threat and high challenge, we feel adequately challenged in our demands where we can meet the needs, meet the expectations. We can access our own brilliance. So this is really where we want to be. We feel empowered to change and make wise choices. An integrated executive state frees us from that past conditioning. It attunes us to the feelings and experiences of others, and it enables us to remain focused enough to set and achieve goals. It also allows us to consciously respond instead of automatically react to life events. So this is very relevant to managing stress because we have to be compassionate towards ourselves and understand what part of the brain are we operating in when we're experiencing stress. This will be influenced by our coping skills, our past programming, and how we're wired. But it is really important to reflect on what state you're in and then to be able to meet that need. Or if it's your child that's under stress, recognizing what state they're in and how to meet that need to get into that executive state, that green part of the brain.
And I love this graphic too because the brain is so complex and there's so many big words associated with each region of the brain, and I feel like this is just so easily digested. And I personally have this like hung up in my office and I give it out to all the parents because I think it is so helpful for us to understand, oh, my child is screaming, they must be down in their brainstem, like they need my help to get out of that survival mode and to move up in that brain. Or even noticing myself, right? Like my heart is beating really fast, I can't think, I'm probably down in my brainstem and need to like actively engage in certain activities to try to help me calm down. And so I love this graphic and I hope that it is just as helpful.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. I think I can pass this on to parents and for children, teachers. Really, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, it's free on the Conscious Discipline website, the graphic. So it's really handy. It just simplifies it. Like Emily said, it makes it something very complex, a lot more easily digested and processed.
Really? Yeah. Thank you.
And then just going from there, talking a bit about the stress response system. And the stress response system is so powerful. I think we do not give enough credit to the impact of our mental health on our physical health. But when a person experiences stress, their body will release several hormones in order to engage in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so you have adrenaline and cortisol, and both of those hormones are released, help assist the body when you need those survival functions, right? So you're trying to run from a bear, so you're kind of turning off all of these other things in your body to focus on that fight, flight, or free response. And so when you have that repeated or prolonged exposure to a lot of stressful events, that toxic stress we were talking about, or the chronic stress where it's long term and there's not a lot of supportive relationships, it really does have harmful effects on your health and your well-being because it's constantly flooding that adrenaline and cortisol. And when that happens, it leads to changes in your glucose, it leads to potentially heart disease. There's oftentimes a lot of trouble with focusing. You may be really irritable. A couple others slipping my mind. What are the
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many
Anxiety.
physical responses to
Yeah.
the stress response system.
Digestive issues, GI problems, headaches, I think you said heart disease, sleep problems, weight gain, memory, concentration, focus, impairment.
So even though sometimes we don't realize the impact that our thoughts and feelings have on us, it really does have a direct physical link to, or a direct link to our physical health. And so I think that's really important because I don't think that's talked about very much, and it really does impact us long term.
Yes, I agree. I think that's a really impactful slide to connect the mind body component of this. One of the most interesting pieces of data that I pulled when we were making this presentation was that, naturally our bodies release cortisol when we're exposed to stress, and the natural stress response system is flood with cortisol, get through the problem, get back down to our natural level. But if you're repeatedly exposed to stress or it's a prolonged exposure, those cortisol levels aren't going down, and that can impact your immune system, your digestive system, your reproductive system. So it really does all just operate in unison. So it just really drove home the point of how important stress management is to our overall well-being. So this is a very helpful tool to recognize when we're starting to experience stress at an unmanageable level. So all of us have a natural pattern of responding to stress that includes our brain, our nervous system, hormones, behaviors, etc. And typically the stress response is in proportion to the stressor. So say you accidentally spill coffee on yourself. Initially you might have a strong reaction, but quickly you might find a napkin to clean it up. And then, you might be annoyed for a second because it stained your shirt or whatever. But then you level out and you're calm again. So that is an example that can be indicated through this graphic. So you might spike and be stuck in the high zone for a second and then realize the proportion of the threat, get your napkin, and then you're back in the middle. So this is all relevant to our window of tolerance of what we can manage for stress. So when we feel calm, regulated, capable of managing a stressor or a challenge, we are within this window of tolerance, which is the blue dashed lines on this image. For some people, their past experiences have wired their brains to anticipate threats where there are none. So this can contribute to a smaller window of tolerance. So at any given point throughout our experiences, our window of tolerance can widen or narrow. And so, I would imagine that a lot of people this year, particularly through the pandemic and the socioeconomic impact that it's had, the social impact, the health impact, our windows have probably gotten a bit smaller than what we might typically experience. And so a minor stressor, what might have been a minor stressor had we checked in this time last year, is probably a more significant stressor now. And so if we are spiked and we're sent into the high zone on this graphic, that might feel like being edgy, being irritable, even in some cases, a little bit of mania, which is where you sleep less and you make really irrational and impulsive decisions. It might feel like anxiety and panic. It could look like angry outbursts, or even can manifest into physical pain. So those are all signals that you could be stuck in the high zone. Now, stress can also send us in the opposite direction. And so we might get stuck in what is called the low zone. And this can feel like depression or sadness. It might manifest as isolating ourselves from our support network. It might come across as exhaustion or fatigue, or even numbness, which an important note about numbness, I think a lot of times we think of numbness as being not feeling. We don't feel any feelings. But really what numbness is an overwhelming amount of emotion and feeling to where they can't be teased apart and organized. So it just manifests as this feeling of numbness, emotional numbness. We're unable to process deeply what each feeling is. So we have some tips and some skills later on in the presentation on how to widen this window of tolerance, expand our resilience. And we've also linked our YouTube series later on in the presentation where we go through skills to enhance this resilient zone. So those are all coming up later on in this presentation.
And like Arianne said earlier, we have the ability to widen and narrow this. And so just like when you go to the gym and you start to build those muscles slowly but surely, the more you do it and the more you practice these skills, the stronger those muscles get and the more natural they become. But it's kind of like going to the gym. You can't go to the gym for a week and lose 10 pounds. That's not how it works, right? Like you have to get stronger and you have to keep going and it has to be consistent. And so it's the same thing with your mental health as it is with your physical health. Let me make sure my sound is on. Hold on. Can you hear that? No?
You can. Yeah, you're good.
Restlessly, feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy.
The sound just went out, Emily.
The kind most of us face day in and
Check your screen sharing settings that you've checked off the sound box.
Share sound, sorry. Should I start it over or just move back a couple seconds?
You might want to start it over. It was a little fuzzy.
Okay.
your brain.
Sorry about that, guys.
That's better.
Are you sleeping restlessly, feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy and focus, like when you're playing a competitive sport or have to speak in public. But when it's continuous, the kind most of us face day in and day out, it actually begins to change your brain. Chronic stress, like being overworked or having arguments at home, can affect brain size, its structure, and how it functions, right down to the level of your genes. Stress begins with something called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, a series of interactions between endocrine glands in the brain and on the kidney, which controls your body's reaction to stress. When your brain detects a stressful situation, your HPA axis is instantly activated and releases a hormone called cortisol, which primes your body for instant action. But high levels of cortisol over long periods of time wreak havoc on your brain. For example, chronic stress increases the activity level and number of neural connections in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. And as levels of cortisol rise, electric signals in your hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with learning, memories, and stress control, deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis, so when it weakens, so does your ability to control your stress. That's not all, though. Cortisol can literally cause your brain to shrink in size. Too much of it results in the loss of synaptic connections between neurons and the shrinking of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that regulates behaviors like concentration, decision-making, judgment, and social interaction. It also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus, This means chronic stress might make it harder for you to learn and remember things, and also set the stage for more serious mental problems like depression and eventually Alzheimer's disease. The effects of stress may filter right down to your brain's DNA. An experiment showed that the amount of nurturing a mother rat provides its newborn baby plays a part in determining how that baby responds to stress later in life. The pups of nurturing moms turned out less sensitive to stress because their brains developed more cortisol receptors, which stick to cortisol and dampen the stress response. The pups of negligent moms had the opposite outcome, and so became more sensitive to stress throughout life. These are considered epigenetic changes, meaning that they affect which genes are expressed without directly changing the genetic code. And these changes can be reversed if the moms are swapped. But there's a surprising result. The epigenetic changes caused by one single mother rat were passed down to many generations of rats after her. In other words, the results of these actions were inheritable. It's not all bad news, though. There are many ways to reverse what cortisol does to your stressed brain. The most powerful weapons are exercise and meditation, which involves breathing deeply and being aware and focused on your surroundings. Both of these activities decrease your stress and increase the size of the hippocampus, thereby improving your memory. So don't feel defeated by the pressures of daily life. Get in control of your stress before it takes control of you.
So now we're going to start getting into how do we control our stress. And to start, we have to understand how our thoughts, our behaviors, and our feelings are all connected and operate in a cycle of one another. So as we have well established at this point, stress is processed at multiple levels within the body and the brain. And it influences our decision making and our problem solving skills and abilities. So as we saw in that video, overstimulation of certain parts of the brain can influence how we interact with others, how we're even able to control our stress. And we know that what part of the brain we are in can influence how we react and how we make decisions. So our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions are impacted by our experiences of stress. So this can contribute to a style of thinking referred to as all or nothing thinking or black and white thinking. Predicting the future or catastrophizing is another style of thinking. So that's thinking that we are able to predict the outcome of whatever is going to happen, despite that likely not being the case, or thinking that the worst case scenario is bound to happen. Another way of thinking that stress can contribute to is should statements. So putting undue pressure on yourself, saying, I should have done this, or I should do this. That can really place a lot of pressure and increase the amount of stress and just really increase stress at the end of the day. So those are styles of thinking that serve in this cycle. And as we're establishing, our thoughts influence our behaviors, which in turn can impact our emotions. And then emotions influence thoughts, which influence behaviors, and so on.
Yes, and I love this graphic because I think it just shows you how clearly like they're all interconnected and intertwined and they all lead to each other. I know I have heard people say like, oh, it's fine, I don't need to deal with my feelings. I just think about something else or avoid it, right? But that doesn't necessarily help because they're all interconnected. So an example would be kind of that all or nothing thinking, that black or white thinking. There's no point in even trying. So then your emotion or your mood might feel really depressed, or you may feel worthless or discouraged, which then leads you to avoid people or situations and become less active, which then feeds into that thought of there's no point in even trying. And it just keeps going in this repetitive kind of triangle or circle, whatever shape you prefer, right? But they all stay connected. And I think just recognizing and being aware of that link can be really powerful. And noticing the thoughts that you're having throughout the day. Maybe you notice you're having a really bad day and you feel really sad and really overwhelmed, maybe taking the time to notice, what are my thoughts? Like, what is happening in my head and what is the narrative that I'm telling myself? Because that can have a big role in the way that you're behaving or the way that you're feeling about things.
Yeah, so that's the good news, is that we can break this cycle. We have total control over our influence on this cycle because our thoughts, behaviors, and feelings are our own. So first, of course, we must understand how our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions operate in this cycle, which takes some reflection and some time, and how they either fuel or extinguish our patterns of stress. We must acknowledge that while we may not be able to eliminate the source of our stress, we can manage our sorry, my screen just went blank for a second. We can manage our response and our choices. So this leads into the idea of our circle of control, which is a great tool to really put our own stress and our own role in our stress into perspective. So our circle of control. So something to ask yourself, is this source of stress something that you can directly influence? Another question or prompt is, what are ways in which you can challenge your unhelpful thoughts or engage in new or different behaviors to impact your experience of stress? So let's take a look at our circle of control versus our circle of influence and see where we often fall.
And just thinking about and noticing, right, in that circle of control or circle of concern, right? The circle of concern is very reactive. So a lot of your time and energy is spent on things that are outside of your control. So, you can't really control what other people say or what other people think of you. You can't really control what's on the news or how other people are acting. That's not something that's within your control. What you can control, right, and what you can be proactive about and focus your time and energy on are the things within your control. So you are in control of what you say, what you do, maybe like what you eat, if you exercise, what you choose to look at on social media, what you choose to engage with, who you choose to engage with, and your self-care and the way that you react. Those are all things that are in your control. And I think it can get really easy to get caught up in that kind of reactive circle of control, especially when we are stressed, right? And so kind of noticing these aren't things that are within my control. So why don't I shift my focus more into something that I can control that will help me feel better versus engaging in something that makes me feel worse?
Yeah, and so we also wanted to talk briefly about stress and your relationship with your child, since this is for parents. So children depend on their adult caregiver, so the important adults in their life, to make sense of new information or experiences. So even as adults, our brains are constantly wanting to make meaning of things happening in our day-to-day life, and children are no different. Particularly young children, because every experience is new. So if a trusted adult is dysregulated due to stress or trauma, a child is going to use this to interpret how to respond to a situation. So this experience can oftentimes be frightening or confusing for young children when a trusted adult is showing signs of fear or confusion. This is partially due to the role of mirror neurons. So this is really cool. Mirror neurons are a special part of our brain that interpret and respond to what we are watching or experiencing. So this is why, like, scary movies, some people get such a thrill out of them. Our mirror neurons make us feel like we're there in the movie. Or if you've ever cried at the Notebook, like I have 1,000 times, you can thank mirror neurons for that, because it makes us feel like we're experiencing that. And it's part of what gives us empathy and ties us to another and connects us to another. So the role of mirror neurons is actually critical in how children process and respond to their parents' stress. So they can actually internalize and feel that stress too. So self-awareness and regulation are very important components of caregiving. Not to say they're not challenging, but they're very important. So as we always, Emily and I overuse this phrase probably, but put your oxygen mask on first. You cannot give from an empty cup, and we have to feel good and be healthy to really show up and be present for our children in the best way possible.
Yes. And self-care is not selfish, it is essential. And then also just identifying maybe some of the signs that a child is stressed or is experiencing stress and it's impacting them negatively. So you might notice negative changes in behavior. So that tends to be one of the first thing people notice because their child is being really defiant or extremely impulsive. They're very reactive. You say no and they just lose it. Those are all kind of signs that maybe they're really dysregulated and struggling. There's also somatic symptoms that oftentimes kids will display. So, oh, my tummy hurts, I have a tummy ache, my head hurts, I'm too tired, like extreme tiredness, or having trouble with like interpersonal relationships or connecting with other children or other peers. You may notice an increase in conflict, or it may be the opposite way, and the child may be very, very withdrawn and doesn't want to talk, doesn't want to engage, doesn't want to play with friends. And then also noticing that fixed versus the growth mindset. So that fixed mindset is kind of like there's one way, kind of like that black or white thinking we were talking about earlier. There's one way and this is the way I have to do it. I only want the blue blocks and no other blocks. But that growth mindset is, okay, I wanted to build with the blue box, but there's also red blocks and there's no more blue blocks left. If I want to keep building my tower, I guess I'll use red and blue. So it's kind of that executive functioning, right? That green part of the brain to problem solve and find other ways to create a solution to what they want to do. So with that fixed mindset, you probably will notice their frustration tolerance is fairly low. But when they have that growth mindset, they have a lot of persistence. They keep trying. They don't give up when it doesn't work the way they want the first time. And so that's also a really helpful way to kind of identify stress in children.
Yes. And so what do we do if we experience conflict with our child or with children that we care for? Because it's inevitable to happen. Any relationship is vulnerable to rupture, which is disagreement, miscues, miscommunication. So we repair, and repair is really where growth and trust is built. So it's a very important part of all relationships. But how we do it with children is through this very simple process of DNA. So D stands for describe. So describe without judgment what happened. So in this example, I yelled at you earlier today. Breathe deeply and download some calm, because again, those mirror neurons will start to trigger in your child and they'll start to feel calm as well. Next would be name. So name your feelings at the time. I felt really frustrated. This is a great way to model for children how to express emotions. Give them words. They might not know the word frustrated or what frustrated feels like, but if they saw that you were frustrated, now they have an idea. Finally, acknowledge. So acknowledge your desire at the time. I wanted us to have lunch together. So altogether, it would be, I yelled at you earlier today. I felt really frustrated because I wanted us to have lunch together. So this is a really great way to model for children, one, that mistakes happen, oops happens, and it's okay to say how you were feeling and to repair the relationship afterwards. And it's pretty incredible to see this in action after a few times when children do start to label their emotions. And they'll even correct you if you say, wow, you look really sad. I am not sad, I am mad. Gotten that one several times. And it's great because they can communicate clearly. And it's like, all right, well, now we can come to a solution together. So when going through the process of conflict with a child and you're in that reconnection phase, remember three things: that composure is your lifeline. So again, think mirror neurons, think co-regulation. It's okay to oops. We all are human. We all are subject to mistake. And then feelings are your friends. They're at least not your enemy. Feelings are simply just a compass. They're telling us something's up and we got to figure this out together.
And I also think it's really important for everyone to hear this. There is no perfect parenting. It does not exist. It's not real. There is no such thing. There is only good enough parenting. And part of being a good enough parent is acknowledging, oops, I made a mistake. Oops, I lost my temper. Nobody is perfect. And by modeling that for your child, you're actually saying it is okay for you to make mistakes too. And here's how you repair that when you do make a mistake, because they're inevitable. We all make them. And it's really normal. And we don't have to be scared of that.
Yeah.
So, talking about things that kind of buffer the impact of stress or the effects of stress, a lot of it is really linked to our health. So, thinking about exercise, even if it's going for a walk or stretching, doing yoga, anything like that, any kind of movement helps to regulate your lower brain a bit more. And the more you do that regularly, the more you're able to stay consistently regulated, for lack of a better word. Um, Another thing is sleep. I don't know how many of you maybe have had a really hard time sleeping one night and maybe you just like could not get comfortable, could not fall asleep, could not stay asleep. And think about how you functioned the next day, right? And how small, minor things that probably would have inconvenienced you, like spilling your coffee, maybe feel much, much bigger because you haven't had adequate sleep in order to cope with those stressors. And so noticing there is a link between the amount of sleep that you get and the way that you respond to stress. And another thing is your nutrition, right? So a lot of our mental health is also linked to the gut health. And so paying attention to like the things that you're eating or making sure that you're eating consistently throughout the day and not going too long where your blood sugar drops really low or spikes really high, trying to keep that consistent level and making sure that you're eating throughout the day. And drinking enough water, because water also has a big impact. The other thing is supportive relationships, finding a friend that you can call, whether it's your family, your friend, your sister, your brother, your cousin, whoever it is, right, that feels supportive and that will listen to you, and seeking out those relationships very intentionally when you do feel stressed. There is such a big difference between calling a supportive friend when you feel overwhelmed by a day and them just being like, yeah, that really does stink. Like, that's really hard and really overwhelming. Versus somebody being like, you're fine, you'll be okay, you'll be all right, right? It doesn't feel nurturing, it doesn't feel empathetic, and you don't feel the same sense of relief, right? Of just being validated. And then going into relaxation techniques. And I love these. I am a huge advocate of meditation and progressive muscle relaxation, deep breathing. And the reason is because it literally changes the way that your brain is functioning and it helps your theta waves calm down and slow down so that you're better able to focus and function overall. And then deep breathing. Here's the thing, we teach all these fancy skills to kids and parents and all sorts of fun things, but at the end of the day, your breath is always with you. And so, the most important thing that you can take away from anything that we say today is to remember to breathe and take those really deep breaths because it makes your body calm down. And especially if you're in that survival state of your brain, it will help to move you up when you're able to breathe and regulate again. And then lastly, gratitude. And I think a lot of people hear this and they're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think it's different than just saying, yeah, I have a roof over my head and I have food to eat, so I should just be grateful. Not like that, right? So it's gratitude as in appreciating the small things, right? Like, I'm so grateful for my sweet little kitty cat who's soft and purrs when I feel really low, or that my dog comes in, licks my hand if they notice I've been having a bad day, or I'm really grateful for this flower that is outside of my window. I love the way that the colors look, and it's like the small things that we lose sight of that are really important within that.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, like you said, it's not just like gratitude for the sake of being grateful. It's stress really can give us tunnel vision. I know when I've been under a lot of stress, I can only focus on the negative and things that aren't going my way and things that could improve. And so the purpose of doing gratitude exercises is simply just to regain balance. And it's very helpful to feel more in control and not so laser focused on everything that's going wrong, which segues into the next topic, which is awareness. So we have to have awareness to understand what's going right. So managing stress, we can't emphasize this enough, it begins with awareness. So be conscious of your experiences and not just Of course, we're always conscious when we're stressed, right? Because it doesn't feel good. But really be non-judgmentally curious about where that stress is coming from. When do you notice you've left your window of tolerance? How frequently? How intensely? This is a great exercise. Just daily monitoring or weekly monitoring, reflecting on your week of when you felt like you left that window of tolerance, when things felt low or when you felt stuck on high. I know when Emily was reading the last slide, I was thinking about when I don't get good sleep, my window of tolerance is way smaller the next day. If I get out to my car and I realize I've forgotten my keys in the house, that feels like a really terrible thing. Whereas on a normal day, I'd just be like, oh, I forgot my keys. But so sleep is something that I realize narrows my window of tolerance. So another component of becoming aware and managing our stress is mindful self-compassion. So like gratitude, this is a tool to reframe how we approach our thoughts and feelings. So again, going back to that idea of non-judgmental curiosity, simply noticing our thoughts, noticing our emotions without judgment. So not labeling them as bad or good, or, I should or I shouldn't, but simply just noticing what the emotion is. Focus on your breathing. So again, your breath is portable. It's the best tool that we have because it's always with us. And naturally, as we go throughout our day, we tend to go on autopilot and start taking very shallow, unfulfilling breaths. And yeah, it serves its purpose. It keeps us going. But deep, intentional breathing is so good for our brain, so good for our bodies, and can really help to ground us and to get us back in the moment in a really quick and accessible and subtle way. So again, this can help ground us during moments of stress that feel intense. It's a really great way to take a pause. Breathing and some gentle movement, so whether that's stretching or maybe it's just taking a short walk, are ways that we can regulate ourselves when we're feeling stuck in that lower brain. So the lower brain is responsive to sensory input, so movement, smell, touch, taste. So short and small doses of sensory input can help to stimulate that lower part of the brain and get us into the midbrain and eventually the upper brain.
And then certain things that you can do to kind of help you when you're managing that stress. So when you feel those intense moments of stress, you feel really overwhelmed by it, kind of moving through breathing exercises and including that movement, just like Arianne said. So we want that lower brain to become regulated, and you can do that through using that physical stimuli. And even if it's literally something like laying in your bed and stretching, like, good, that's better than nothing. Go for a walk, go do something easy and simple, or do yoga in your living room, just some kind of physical movement that is helpful to you. And also, part of this is in order to prevent stress from becoming super overwhelming, you have to engage in this regularly. You have to do these things very intentionally. You have to choose to eat nutritious foods and drink enough water and choose to go to bed early. Or, maybe not early if you don't have work in the morning, but just being intentional about how much sleep that you are getting and really taking the time to schedule and carve out that time to do activities that bring you joy or make you feel lighter or that just bring a smile to you. Anything that feels rewarding. And, we make time for what we want it to be important. And so choose to make that a priority. Choose to put yourself above your child, because ultimately you can't choose to take care of your child if you're not taking care of yourself. And so even if it's 10 minutes a day where you're like, okay, before my kid wakes up, I'm going to do a couple stretches in my room, or when they just go to bed, before you go to bed, maybe taking time to do like a 10-minute yoga thing or 10 minutes of meditation or whatever it is that feels within your reach, choosing to do that intentionally and choosing a time to carve that out for yourself. And then we're going to use a practice. So the skill that we're going to practice today is grounding. And So I just want to invite everyone and remind them of a couple things. So it is really important when you do any kind of meditation or deep breathing that you sit up straight. And the reason is your lungs are better able to expand when you have that big, deep diaphragmatic breathing. So when we're stressed, we breathe up here, and we should be breathing all the way down into our belly. And so that's what we're going to practice today. And so I want to just invite everyone to close their eyes if you feel comfortable. And if you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes, just have a gentle gaze down at the floor. And I just want to remind you that if at any time you feel distracted or start going through other things in your head, that's okay. Just notice and label it thinking, and then go back to your breath. Don't judge yourself, don't get mean, don't get critical. So grounding refers to bringing your attention to your body in the present moment by noticing how your body or a part of your body is making contact with the surface. So you can ground by sitting, by standing, by laying down, or just finding any comfortable position that feels good to you. So as you do that, sit up straight and find a comfortable position, and just take a couple deep breaths to kind of settle into your seat. And as you find a comfortable position, just begin to notice how you're being supported by the chair or the floor or the bed, whatever it is that you're on. And as you bring your attention to the places of support, just notice your breathing. Notice your heart rate and your muscle relaxation. And notice especially any places inside that feel more relaxed, more pleasant, or just simply feel neutral to you. And really just breathe into that. Next, I want you to bring your attention to your back, your lower body, your thighs, your legs, and if you're sitting or standing, notice how your feet are resting on the floor and how they are making contact with the ground. And bring your attention to the sensations that are calming or neutral within your body. Just take your time with that. Really just notice and breathe into it. And as you bring your attention to neutral or pleasant sensations, notice your breathing. Notice your heart rate. Notice your muscle relaxation. If you become aware of an uncomfortable or even painful sensation, just shift your attention to places that feel better, more comfortable, or neutral. Just notice the change when you shift that focus. as a way to bring your practice of grounding to a close, I want you to slowly scan your body from head to toe, bringing attention to all the places inside that have changed in a more pleasant or neutral way since you started. And just take your time, there's no rush. And whenever you're ready, bring your awareness back to the room or space where you are. And if you need more time, take all the time that you need. And I really just like that practice because particularly when we're in anxiety, we tend to be like up here. And I always kind of describe it as like you feel like you're fluttering to some degree. And with a practice like grounding, it kind of just settles you. And I particularly love it in this because, right, I'm presenting, there's a little bit of underlying anxiety that I have right now. And even in doing that, right, I can settle and I feel more grounded and more present in this moment now than I have previously.
Yeah, that practice is really wonderful. And the thing that I love a lot about meditations and grounding practices, they don't have to be long. They don't have to be these really drawn out, elaborate practices. You can find a quiet moment in your car, maybe before you go into work or when you get off of work and need to just decompress from the day and take 5 minutes and run through a body scan meditation or a progressive muscle relaxation. And there's so many available online. So it's a very accessible and wonderful tool to help regulate our bodies and manage our stress. Another way through connection. Connection through supportive relationships is one of our best tools to buffer against the effects of stress. In fact, relationships can prevent stress from becoming toxic stress or traumatic. Humans are wired for connection. Our brains, we're social beings. We all have different social needs, of course. Some people prefer more socialization than others, but we are all wired for connection. So if we do not meet this need, we can start to feel depleted, reactive, or even depressed. So I think Emily said it earlier, intentional relationships are very important. So intentionally seeking out and maintaining relationships that provide you with empathy, encouragement, understanding, nurturance. Those are really critical to our well-being. And when you can, be this person for someone that you care about. So when you're feeling good and when you're in a good place, maybe you can provide that empathy and encouragement, that validation or that nurturance. And be sure to set appropriate boundaries that align with your beliefs and values. That can be a great tool to establish really these healthy relationships. Boundaries are critical to our well-being. And when we're not aligning with our core values and core beliefs, we can often feel stress. So circling ourselves with relationships that support that is a great way to keep ourselves feeling good and fulfilled.
Sorry. What did I do?
It looks like it went out of full screen.
Oops. Is it back?
It's not on full screen, but we can see it. There you go. Good.
Sorry for the distraction there, guys.
No problem.
Good.
Great.
Thank you. I'm so glad it's been helpful to you, Ernestine. I'm glad to hear that this is providing some hopefully helpful resources and skills and just knowledge about it, right? So even when we were talking about stress earlier, a big part of it is like learning and developing the skills that we need in order to successfully complete a task or complete something. So stress can be a signal that we're feeling that we're maybe lacking the necessary tools or skills or knowledge to meet the demands that are being placed on us. And so sometimes it's like, how do we transform this stressful circumstance or stressful event into a learning experience? What can I take from this and what can I gain from this? And also who you can reach out to obtain resources, like who is really helpful at providing additional information or places that you could find this information to be able to increase your knowledge or the skills that you need to do that. And then also recognizing, like, how can we use these new skills in the future to prevent problems like this from occurring, right? So maybe actively using exercise or breathing. And so instead of getting to the point where we're so stressed out, we're like crying and screaming and snapped at our kid, right? Maybe it's that we just cried and needed to take those deep breaths and did that because it is normal to cry. It's still appropriate to do those things. But it doesn't feel good when we scream at somebody else or if we snap at them because we're so stressed that we can't handle it. And so how do we incorporate a new skill and this new knowledge in order to prevent, the higher end of that from happening? Once you learn a skill, it can't be taken from you. And that's the beauty of it. Just like knowledge, nobody can take that away from you. It's yours.
So just to close out this presentation, we do have a playlist on the Children First YouTube page with very short videos that help to enhance our skills and enhance our resilience. So as we've said, it's like going to the gym, just takes consistency and effort. And with that, your resilience will grow. So we can provide the links that are in this presentation. We can send them to the family advocates after this. And then just a quick little technique to leave us with is STOP. And STOP is an acronym that quite literally stands for stop what you are doing. Take a few deep breaths to ground yourself and return to the present moment. So oftentimes in stress, we're either worried about the past or we're living in the future. So just stopping and taking a moment can bring us back to the present. Observe what is going on in your body. What physical sensations are you experiencing? What's in your mind? What story are you telling yourself? And then your emotions. What is this core feeling right now? And then finally proceed using this information in an intentional, conscious way. So choosing a coping skill that is effective and healthy for you.
And then if you have any questions or if you need to talk or want additional resources or feel like, oh, maybe I've noticed this with my child or with myself and I could use some extra support, feel free to reach out to us with questions or, a need for resources and things like that. Arianne and I are always really happy to hear from people and we love to connect and talk to others. So feel free to jot down our emails or obviously all of the family advocates will have them as well.
And I think that concludes our time. So if there's any questions, we do have a couple moments to do that. Or if there's any comments, concerns, anything related to stress management, we can take the time to discuss that further. But thank you guys for your time and